Tom, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Pratik.
I want to start with the origin story here. And obviously, there are so many different moving parts. AI is moving so fast and everything's getting reorganized. So, going back, even before you started Superset, what opportunities did you see in AI and data, the landscape, that convinced you that one, the real opportunities, and two, that Venture Studio was the right vehicle to pursue this?
Yeah, so not to go all the way back to the dinosaurs here, Pratik, but in some sense, I think data AI kind of maybe picked me and my team long before the rest of the planet got so excited about it. So we're a bunch of geeks over here. We've been building data management, data science, AI, machine learning applications, super algorithmic stuff. My first company over 20 years ago was, we didn't have the language that we use today, but it was a mathy, highly algorithmically intense undertaking. So for whatever reasons, I've always gravitated to these kinds of problems. I like them. I remember when we started Superset, there was a reporter who was writing an article and said that the Superset guys are doing boring but bountiful stuff. And that really hurt my feelings when I first read it. Like, boring? What are you talking about? It's not boring to us, but I guess it is admittedly geeky. So we've been doing it for a long time and we just like it. We like these puzzles. We think you're continually having to sharpen your saw. There's always new methods and techniques and technologies that we're inventing and other people are inventing and it's just fun to figure them out and deploy them in software that helps people solve real problems. That was the premise for Superset. And I would say, in terms of the lessons learned along the way, certainly we're all operating off of an entirely different tech stack today. So you can't copy and paste what we used to do. But we find that the problems, if they don't recur, they sure do rhyme, right? They correspond to the kinds of patterns that we used to build systems a long, long time ago. So amongst all the breathlessness about AI today, I think it's important to remember that yeah, I mean, the techniques and enabling technologies are different, but the underlying patterns and the methods that we use to build are the same. And that's what got us going over here at Superset. Like, that's a big, sprawling, uncapped opportunity. We don't know what form it takes exactly, but as a premise, it really glistened for us. And that's what got us up off the couch, got us building over here.
Amazing. And when you look at this landscape, how do you assess the merit of a given opportunity? Like, how do you size it up and decide that of all the things, this is where our time and capital and resources should go into?
Yeah, we have put the numbers to it recently. And in fact, we've calculated that for every 9 ideas that we look at in earnest, only one of them actually takes root and becomes a company, which is to say 8 out of 9 times we're taking shots and we're being very intentional about possibilities, exploring them fully. But most of those shots don't go in the goal. And that's okay, by the way. That took us a while to get zen-like about, right, right, right. We are in the business of taking risk and taking shots. Not everyone is going to work out. In terms of the 1 out of 9, to answer your question, that does work, it's a combination of the traditional venture capitalist team, technology market, right? Do we have the right kind of know-how with the right team collectively and with the other amazing co-founders we get to work with? Is it an uncapped market with huge potential? Is it growing fast? We hope. By the way, it could be a market that lots of people don't already understand. But if we see it and we can persuade ourselves, no, there's a there there, that's not daunting for us. We're okay taking those kinds of risks. It doesn't have to be stuff that's tracked in big Gartner reports already. It can be in open spaces that people don't yet see. The other thing that we look at, Pratik, is the why now and why us questions. So why now? Yeah, that's a cool idea, but I personally have made the mistake in the past of confusing clarity for proximity. In other words, yeah, that's a cool idea, but there are all these other kinds of factors that impede your ability to turn that idea into a company today, right? One of my partners here at Superset built a voice assistant, an AI voice assistant, 12 years ago. really ahead of his time, turned it into an interesting big company that Cisco acquired. But my goodness, right? That was done at a different time. Today, AI voice assistants are taking root, and it's going to be just this gigantic, inexorable trend, right? So the why now dimension really matters. And the final thing is why us. So a lot of those ideas, Pratik, when we look at them, we say, okay, that makes sense. It's big, great team, good technology, big market. It's happening now. But if we can't persuade ourselves that we know something unique and special, that gives us some kind of unassailable, durable advantage, we stay home, right? Like we have to feel like we can do something that makes a difference, that we have a technical secret or a method or, from Back to the Future, I like to call it the flux capacitor. What's a flux capacitor? Who the hell knows? But you got to have some special sauce or some technical thing that you can do, technical trick that you can pull off that others can't quickly emulate.
For someone who's new to the studios, the venture studio, can you just briefly explain like how does it work, and specifically, how does Superset work?
Yeah. So when I started Superset, I was broadly aware, like this guy, Bill Gross in Southern California from Idea Lab is arguably the OG of venture studios. He's been doing it a long time. So I was aware of him, but I started walking around town. I talked to Jack Abraham at Atomic. I talked to the folks in Pioneer Square Labs up in Seattle. And it rapidly became clear that, wow, everybody's doing something that sort of looks and feels like a studio like parallel entrepreneurship thing, but they're doing it differently, right? So there are lots of different models. It's still early for the asset class. And I think the jury's out. I wasn't around for the beginning of private equity, but there was that moment where, Chavez and Kohlberg had this idea like, what if we got a loan and took this company private? It's like, what? You're going to take a company private? Most companies want to go public. We want to take it private, fix it, lever up. It's throwing off cash, use that cash to pay the loan, fix the company and create. So that happened, right? I wasn't there, but whatever it is, 30, 40 years later, okay, every private equity is a thing. Everybody really understands it. So I think that time will come for venture studios, but not today. To answer your question, the way we think about it is it's a super hands-on, extremely concentrated method where we don't want to critique other people's craftsmanship. We want to build shoulder to shoulder, right? We're operators first. Sometimes friends say, I hear you got a fund. Can I pitch you? And I'm always disappointing people because they're like, if only I were a venture capitalist. We don't look at deals the way venture capitalists do. The companies we build we're in conversation with people about lots of good ideas. Always, we have formation is key, right? That's the first aspect of a venture studio. For us, we have a somewhat more organized process now because it's not an algorithm, it's not a checklist, but we have a rhythm and a flow for exploring an idea, stage, a set of questions that we want to answer. I touched on some of them already, like what's the size of the market? What do we need to believe about how fast the market could grow? Who's on first? Who's on second? Who are the incumbents, the complements, the competitors? Understanding the market space, really getting down and dirty with the product, right? No jazz hands here. Like really think through what's the product? What are we building for who? Who's the buyer? Who's the user? Those aren't necessarily the same people. So all of these questions, right? We spend a lot of time trying to get our heads around. And our method is one where as we persuade ourselves to do a thing, we write what we call the solution memo. So venture capitalists have what they call the investment memo, right? Where they write down the logic of a particular investment. This is sort of the prequel to that, right? The solution memo is why should this company exist? And here's our best thinking as to how we respond to all of those kinds of questions over time. That's the method we take. And I can tell you, it's really working pretty well for us so far.
That's amazing, and thanks for the clarity on that, because many times, it's just not, at least for people who are not familiar, they just don't know how this works. Okay, so going a level deeper. So in the current, today's data and AI stack, there's so much capital flowing into all layers of compute and storage, orchestration, security, you name it. Layers are famously overfunded. So much money has flowed into foundation models, for example, big LLMs. But according to you, what layers are underfunded right now, and where do you see an opportunity to build? Maybe pick your top two or three favorites.
Well, so it'll sound like I'm peddling my own book here, Pratik, as I answer the question, but even setting aside my own motivational bias, I think more and more market watchers are looking at this, to your point, saying, oh my God, it's a lot of money already in LLMs. As I've said, if you got an extra $8 billion burning a hole in your pocket and you want to create a new LLM from scratch, go for it. I just don't see that
Right.
as a very promising undertaking, especially today. The opportunity is the applications, right? And the tooling and enabling infrastructure, what we used to call middleware in the old days, but there's a middleware layer of enabling tools and infrastructure to feed applications. That's high ground, right? And so in our shop, I like to say, let the LLMs be LLMs, seed to the LLMs what is there. Those guys are worried about the science of LLMs and AI. We're all about the engineering of AI, right? The engineering of applications that leverage that enabling substrate. You said the word orchestration. So I think, and in response to your question, I think that that's underserved. I think we took particular note of NVIDIA's acquisition of a company called Run, which is orchestration, a certain kind of orchestration, right? That is important. And I think it's instructive that NVIDIA, which, is you could don't mistake NVIDIA for just a chipset company, right? Because they're building a lot of enabling software services. And I think I wasn't there in the room as they made that decision, but from the outside, it makes all the sense to me that they would be investing in that kind of tooling. Because if you think about it, that capability gives them superb understanding of the end use cases, right? The application use cases that then kind of they fly back into the mothership it can use to invent the next generation of chipsets, right? Once upon a time, who knew sparse matrix multiplication could turn into this AI juggernaut,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And oh wait, we do a lot of sparse matrix multiplication for graphics. They're big ups to the team at NVIDIA because they're constantly inventing and seeing opportunity. Orchestration, from my perspective, is one of those underserved places where I think there's going to be a lot more investment in the days and weeks and months ahead. I do think further, just to fine grain it a little bit, not orchestration of chipsets and clusters at the infra level, but orchestration of enabling LLM, right? The way I think of it is the right model for the right task at the right cost performance trade off. I conjecture that there are a lot of companies as they move from pilot to production with their AI initiatives. The gas fees are going to start to kill them. Nobody's thinking about this right
Right.
now, but the gas fees are going to kill them. And this is when there's going to be a lot more interest in this particular brand of orchestration that I'm talking about, wherein you got to find again the right model, right task, and so you're the orchestrator becomes sort of a conductor of a symphony that's flying in. No, I'm going to use Mistral for that. I'm going to use ChatGPT 3.5 for that. We have this in one of our companies. Use ChatGPT 3.5. It's 1/7 the cost, and the performance or accuracy trade-off for the use case at that company is 2 percentage points. Do that, right? So don't pay for 4.0 when 3.5 is going to get the job done. And so all of those models inside an intelligent orchestrator, I think is it's an exciting opportunity.
No, this is amazing. I love infra, and it's one of my favorite topics. Diving a level deeper. So if you look at this like layer that is enables application builders, I want to dive into a couple of buckets, starting with data infra, because we're seeing a bit of not resurgence. It was always there, but more recently, like data is becoming very, very important. Companies are getting funded, big builders are coming in. So if you look at the data tooling, data infrastructure, what opportunities do you see in terms of, like, for example, will an AI native database emerge? Do we need more like AI native Snowflake? Or do we need more new data labeling? So how do you see the data tooling emerging?
So I was on a call last week where somebody was talking about their offering as AI enablement. I was like, huh, AI enablement. That sounds interesting. Unpack that for me. Well, really what it came down to is it's ETL, right? But for the AI era in 2025. So I think that there's going to be some clever product marketing flourishes that data wranglers and people who do ETL will offer under the banner of AI enablement. By the way, if I were the CEO of that company, I'd call it that way too. But if we're getting really real here on this podcast, I mean, you can run, but you can't hide from these really basic problems of data management. In this case, ingestion, normalization, getting it AI ready. By the way, there are interesting challenges now in clustering and vectorization and chunking, sorry, and vectorization to that end, which enriches these data wrangling things that we've been struggling with for decades. So that will be an important opportunity. And I think there's going to be, along the lines of the example I just shared, I think there's going to be some blurring of the lines. Will there be a new AI native database? Will there be a new Snowflake for AI oriented data? I'm skeptical. I'm pretty sure Snowflake wants to be the Snowflake of AI native databases, right? They got a pretty good shot
Yeah, yeah.
collectively to that end. But there will be upstarts. I mean, that's what makes this job we have so cool, right? Because you never know. Someone's going to throw a grenade in the bunker and blow something up, and there will be some surprises. But at the data infra side of things, I don't see like this radical reordering of the existing ecosystem, right? I think existing players like Snowflake and Databricks and others are plainly already retooling fast to meet this opportunity. There will be upstarts, but I don't think it's going to be like a whole new stack.
Right. That's a great point. And with AI now being able to handle more and more of unstructured data, do you think this is eating into the traditional ETL layer of companies? Their entire premise was, hey, we do ETL really, really well, but LLM, you can just throw unstructured data at it and it'll just make sense of it. So is that a bull case for ETL
Yeah,
startups,
yeah.
bear case, or neutral?
I'm a bear on that score, and I'll tell you, I don't know what the exact logic of Salesforce's acquisition of Informatica was, but that confused me. I'm just going to say it like I don't get it, man. That is Soviet era, you know, master data management. It really didn't work in the 90s. It's unclear if it worked in the aughts. What progress was made in the teens, I don't really know, but I was genuinely confused because if the premise there is no, they have incumbency with lots of customers and the opportunity is to upgrade those customers to a next more AI oriented generation of the same technology. Okay, right. But it's hard from my vantage point, having been in and around those systems for a long time, it's hard to see how that offers a viable alternative at the speed of AI, right? That's the other thing. In 2025, holy cow, the things that used to take 9 months to unfold, to your point, Pratik, are now happening. We're recursing, we're using AI to invent new techniques for exactly these kinds of things. No one's going to convince me that Informatica has some flux capacitor on data integration that is cooler, better, faster, smarter than what we're able to invent today, right? So I'm a little bit more of a bear on that case.
That's great, and that's what it felt like. All right, so moving to coding infra, obviously the most famous use case is code gen or coding copilot tools like Cursor and Windsurf, but there's a lot more to it. So if you look at the coding infra tools, there is tools to generate code and there are tools to review PRs and make sure that from code gen to production it's taken care of. And then there could be maybe AI native Git or some version of AI native code management that is GitHub was born like way like far into the past. So is there new angle of attack? So when you look at code infra, what excites you or where's the opportunity?
Look, hats off to the Cursor guys and other platforms who are generating incredible returns. By the way, in our shop, I've insisted for all of our engineers, like, if you thought this was a fad, get over it fast. You've got to get on these platforms. It needs to be not something you do just for shits and giggles once a week. This has to be part of your workflow. So I'm a buyer. I'm all in, right? And I think there's going to be a lot more innovation there. I don't know exactly what form it takes, but yes, yes, yes. That's a deep durable trend. The opportunity that I feel is underserved there, if you think about this, right? As we went to the cloud, we invested in all of this continuous integration, continuous deployment technology, right? And it was exciting because what the sysadmins used to do was now systematized into what we now call DevOps, right? The trouble and the beef that I've had with CI/CD is that in many cases, it becomes a pipeline for shipping crappy code faster, right? So, and we all know this. If you've run a software organization, by the way, there's a very personal moment where I'm using one of the systems that a company at Superset has created, and I'm getting incensed. I'm getting really angry. Like, why am I bumping into these bugs in production? What the hell? And so I start to throw a little conniption, and the head of engineering of that company, a lovely soul named Max, says, "Tom, you're the reason why." Right? I'm just saying, you're the reason why. I said, "Well, Max, what do you mean?" "Tom, you said ship it. You said ship it fast." And that was my little wake up call. Like, yeah, Max, you got me good on that. You're right. I am part of the problem because we're all trying to get software into the hands of users more quickly, right? But if you think about it from a user perspective, that's a crappy deal. Like, no, I'm not your guinea pig. Why am I debugging your software for you? And so I think that there's a large opportunity now. If we're using AI for code generation, that's the left shoe. The right shoe opportunity is code quality, using AI to actually create self-healing, self-correcting software. That's the dream. And by the way, as more and more people move to platforms like Cursor, the further claim on the table is that you're actually going to be exponentiating the amount of crappy code, right? I mean, these platforms are awesome, but you still need an architect and you still need to quality check the software itself. A code verification problem. It's what happens when this piece of software is released into the wild and comes into contact with a chaos monkey called a human user who doesn't behave the way you want them to, right? Who does weird stuff like I was doing to that earlier piece of software. So I think there's a huge opportunity for what you might call continuous quality and an AI that, again, I mean, the dream for us is AI for self-healing, self-correcting software. We're chasing it down and we think really paying off that premise with one of our companies called Checksum over here.
Amazing. Okay, so we talked about data infra, code infra, and now just one last leg, model infra or model ops. Basically, you have all these amazing models. They're almost, I mean, now they're almost free. Now the goal is to figure out how to manage all of that. So when it comes to, I mean, it's been around for a while. It was called like MLOps, and then it keeps getting rebranded. But net, you have to manage your model infra and make sure you spend the least and to deliver the highest quality application to your user. So what opportunities exist here? And also, more importantly, what pitfalls should builders avoid here?
Well, that's a hard one, Pratik, and I'm sure I don't have the answer, but don't mind me while I speculate idly. I was talking to a venture capitalist who had looked at a lot of those MLOps companies and had a good up close and personal perspective. He conjectured that if you looked at all of the revenue across all of those companies, and I'm not going to name and shame anybody, but if you looked at the revenue across all of those companies, which collectively had, private market valuations measured in the tens of billions of dollars and had received multiple billions of dollars worth of investment. His claim was all in, they maybe have $50 million of ARR. Now, maybe that's uncharitable and inaccurate, but it was a fairly informed point of view, right? So it strikes me that, and we fell into this as well. I mean, model serving, but of course you need infrastructure for model serving, and you need tools for data intelligence for machine learning engineers to stage and prep the data for engines. It just seems that maybe this is more of a psychosocial problem more than a technical one. Everybody, all of these engineers, when it comes to those kinds of tasks, are natural born tweakers. They all want to do their own thing. I mean, they've all got their special little toolkits and they all, so nobody wants to see, wants to move to a more sort of horizontal platform opportunity. And that could explain the $50 million of total top line ARR. I think a couple of them have obviously gotten their hooks into some of the larger LLM players, right? And they have, I'm sure, including that revenue, but those aren't like recurring large deals. Like you latched onto it, you caught a whale, right? That doesn't mean there's a business, right? If you signed an MLOps deal with OpenAI, good for you. But that's not evidence of a broader market. So here again, I'm kind of a bear. It seems it's like the classic example of what people have called a multi-billion-dollar market. The problem is it's $0 billion, right?
Right.
It
Right.
glistens in theory, but nobody's been able to make ML ops really happen and turn into viable businesses in practice.
Right. That's amazing. It's funny, like I had all these questions prepared. And we are like not even like one fourth of the way through, and we're like so
Boy,
deep into it. I love this brainstorm. All right, let's keep going.
all right.
Let's talk about cloud economics, just AI economics, but obviously in cloud. And this is a topic that keeps coming up over and over again. Where hey, if you're open AI, you can keep burning billions until the end of time. You won't run out of capital. But for most startups, you gotta think about just basic economics of your business. In your view, if you're running a AI company, what does average, good, and great look like in terms of gross margins? Let's start there. Like, what does a good business look like?
Having run a bunch of SaaS companies for a long time, the rule, the objective, the marker we all move toward is 80% gross margins. In early stages, you're not at 80% gross margins, but you've got to see a path to 80% gross margins fast. And it's got to be a reliable ramp if you're going to keep your investors with you. So I think that rule still generally applies, but in the AI era, it would make sense to me that people get, greedier and greedier, and the technology allows a move to 85 and 90% gross margins, right? Think about cost to serve in an AI business where you're not hiring a lot of human beings, but you have more AI generated customer support and customer implementation or software there's also business model innovation. I don't want to lose track of this now. What we're seeing in our shop is a move among buyers toward away from SaaS to what you might call AI results as a service. In other words, the buyer doesn't want another tool. They just want the outcome. Just give that company I mentioned, Checksum AI for software quality, give me end-to-end tests that just work and that aren't flaky and that auto heal and auto recover on their own. I don't want another QA automation tool, right? It's a totally different lens. And there's a business model innovation here that I think could create even higher margin companies. I heard Sam Altman recently suggested that we're not too far away from a world where there will be single founder companies with just a single employee and billion-dollar valuations. Because, and we're seeing that also, like you don't need 20 engineers. In fact, if you've got 20 engineers cranking on something before you're at, I'm going to say $4 or $5 million of ARR, I think you're doing it wrong. And by the way, we've not nailed that in a couple of places inside our own studio. So I'm not throwing stones in a glass house here. I mean, but we're learning. No, 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 no. Kick-ass engineers who are making use of these new platforms in small teams of 5 or 6 max, right? Max can put a big dent. And so that, if you also think about it, that's reduced. Talk about, well, that's not gross margins. That's my R&D line. But the point is, with those kinds of tools, we can dramatically start to reduce the COGS attached to software deployment. And that I think could really take us beyond 80% gross margins to 90, 95. Why not?
That's a very interesting view because just a year or two ago, the the discussion around how much it costs to run your business, like, hey, we shouldn't even expect SaaS like margins because it's so heavy and 60% we should be happy with that. But then the cost of intelligence went down so rapidly that we are back in this era where no, it's always been the same. If you are selling a piece of software, you have to kind of this is the zone you have to be in. If you're AI, you don't get a pass or a discount because of that. No, that's
Yeah. And I'm thinking there I am again talking about applications. Oh my
yeah.
God, I don't want to be an LLM. Like honestly, I don't know how OpenAI gets to $10 billion of free cash flow. That's got to be, I mean, they're valued as if they're already past $10 billion of free cash flow. So There's a lot of betting on the come or maybe just plain old hysteria. I don't want to be one of those businesses myself. And I take your point. Like, I don't know how they make the gross margins work. I'm thinking about applications here.
You mentioned an interesting point earlier where very, very small teams are achieving big ARR numbers, rapid growth. So if you were to guide a very early stage founder, maybe it's a founding team, two people, both technical, building an infra company, AI infra company, the first five hires, like what profiles do they need? Should they all be technical? Maybe one GTM, four technical. Like, how do you guide them in structuring the team here?
Yeah. So I hate giving consultative answers like what I'm about to say, which is it depends. But I think it truly does depend on the nature of the company and who their buyer and user is. If you're selling tooling to devs, that's a different motion and you've got a lot more leverage because, by the way, devs don't really want to talk to salespeople. I mean, and, you know what I mean? Like they don't, it's a much lower touch kind of interaction on your way to a sale, right? We have another formation that is a martech formation that sells to modern marketers and CMOs. Look, you can run, but you can't hide. You've got to have, and by the way, in this context, I think the ratio of technical virtuosity to sales virtuosity changes. You need to have kick-ass salesmanship, right, to get into those rooms and to figure out your product market fit, working with customers like marketers who need to see a human being. I mean, there are certainly examples and everybody's of self-serve, and I don't want to paint with too broad a brush here, but the psychosocial imperative there is a marketer. They're marketers for a reason. They like human beings. They need to be talked to. They don't want you to send them an avatar. So that changes, I think, the structure of what it takes to go to market, right? And so to be a little more specific, that martech formation has a slightly higher ratio of market facing people. We don't have AEs yet, but several of us in the rooms in Manhattan talking to marketers because that's what the buyer requires. We would never do that for a tooling infra company that's selling to devs because not only would it not work, you're actually going to piss off devs who don't want to be bludgeoned or chased down in that way. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. So going to building competitive edges here, because in this case, there's so much noise. You have to have a clear stake in the ground and say, this is my positioning. This is how I'm going to build an edge. So I want to get your view on three topics. So starting with, if you look at AI infra, what is your view on, hey, should that be full stack, meaning like, hey, just build a full thing and sell to enterprise? Or do you think there will be best of breed components along each layer, or maybe a mix of both? So composable was monolithic. Like, what is your view on how this will pan out for infra startup?
Yeah. I'd be worried. Look, I was around when we had those best of breed moments and they were awesome, right? One of a prior company had a segmentation engine for marketers and it was the absolute best. And there were data network effects built into it. I remember my VP of engineering in that project came to me once and said, but Tom, all we're doing is segmentation, right? And I said, yes, isn't that great? Right? We've got this company and it's growing like a weed and it all really worked out. There were other elements in the stew, but that was the key thing, right? It was a best of breed play. Honestly, I think those days are mostly done. I think that, and to the point that we made before, look, as soon as you think you've got high ground and a defensible moat, somebody comes in with an AI focused solution that collapses the economics of what you were doing and obliterates your company in a matter of days. This happened to us, by the way. One of our projects, ChatGPT was introduced, and the incredibly technically sophisticated offering that they built was just vaporized almost immediately because markets are efficient, markets move fast. People understood I can go and create an API connection to OpenAI to get something that's pretty much as good as what these guys were offering. So trying to hang your hat on a single special thing, a magic bullet a magic bean or a silver bullet, that scares me. I mean, you, and if you got one, good for you. I'm psyched. But I would say that you got lucky, right? Is that good strategy or did you just get lucky? I think you got lucky. A smarter strategy is to diversify and try to build, especially in the applications arena, think about the whole product and the whole solution. Because I think customers are more likely to stay with you. You've got a more defensible place from which to build if it's more than just a single onesie twosie.
My second question is around consolidation. Basically, there are amazing corners like agent frameworks and vector databases and monitoring tools. So where do you actually expect fragmentation to persist? And where do you expect consolidation?
Man, that's such a good question. I think if I'm going to go long, as OpenAI tools up on the enterprise application side of the business with their recent hire, I think there's going to be a lot of consolidation there, right? And I'm going to go back to Salesforce's acquisition of Informatica as I talk this through with you here. Hmm, maybe that's a flanking move, right? Maybe if I reinterpret that not as a technology proposition, but as a customer flanking opportunity in anticipation of the kinds of things OpenAI and Anthropic will start to do in the enterprise space, okay, that could start to make sense. But the point is, I think for those kinds of enterprise oriented elements, for well-defined solutions with existing large bases of customers, forget the technology, right? Because it needs to be rewritten anyway. And it could be rewritten a lot more quickly using these new platforms along the lines of the conversation you and I are having. Okay, there could be some interesting consolidation in the enterprise application space that would make a ton of sense to me. I think that there will be magic beans and silver bullets. We were talking to somebody last week who claims to have a new kind of LLM engine that can effectively understand not just this, it doesn't just operate off of tokens, but actually can infer semantics from prompts, which dramatically collapses the cost of the context window to feed an LLM. And along the lines of our earlier conversation about the gas fees and the opportunity for orchestration. Okay, well, that's a very well circumscribed thing. And if they have it, who knows if it's actually for real. But as a premise, right, that would be ripe for consolidation, right? As we were talking to this person, I said, like, look, if you actually have what you say you have, then OpenAI and Anthropic and the other large guys can't not let it exist outside of their sphere. Like they've got to own you, right? So lots of consolidation, I think, on the tools. The closer you get to bare metal, the more opportunities for breakthrough acquisitions. By the way, Run.ai, we mentioned them before by NVIDIA. That's a good example, right? Of people going up the stack and down the stack to consolidate based on technical breakthroughs that can power those larger platforms.
And my third question on this topic, final question, is around moats, but practical moats, meaning everyone has access to the same LLMs. We all have access to the OpenAI, Anthropic, same infra from AWS, GCP. So in a more practical way, where can moat accumulate for a startup, especially if they're building an application?
So our view, Pratik, is it's all about the data. The way we talk about it, and every superset company at its core kind of follows this simple little pattern: data in, data out, AI magic in the middle. So to your point, and we've been of that view for a while, look, everyone's using the same LLM and AI substrate. You can gussy it up and make lots of outlandish marketing claims about how yours is better, but people who actually build these systems know. Now, behind the curtain, we're all invoking that same set of technologies. So differentiation and a moat really accrues on the left-hand side, data in, and, or you hope it's an and, the right-hand side, data out. Okay, what do we mean by that? Data in is how effectively, quickly, and intelligently can you sweep over gigantic sets of seemingly disparate data? For example, in the age of AI, it's not just structured numeric data, but it's unstructured data. How can you meld structured numerical data with unstructured data into fast Q&A like, chat GPT like interfaces for users, right? That's data synthesis, I think, becomes a very durable place to compete over time. Data out, and the way we think about agents, for example, you start with on-demand agents. You can think of ChatGPT as an on-demand agent. I open up a browser window, I ask a question, it gives me the answer in that moment. Continuous is more reliably engaged in a business process, right? An agent that tracks inventory levels for a certain product in a certain channel, constantly pinging and replenish and understanding market demand to replenish, right? That's kind of a base level example. There are much richer ones than that. Activation, though, is the last high ground where, and this is where we get into agent to agent protocols. I don't want any human in the loop. I don't want anybody looking at a dashboard. I want the machines to just do the thing. So activating an output from an AI system to another system, that's what we have in mind when we talk about activation. So activating on the data outside of the equation and making it turnkey, like abstracting away all the gore and all the complexity for an enterprise user. Like, I don't want to think about, how did you reset sequences and outreach? And what did you do? What signal did you send Salesforce? And like, just every enterprise user, we think, wants to hit the just handle it button. So there we are again. It's boring, but it sure is bountiful, right? We've learned if you can handle those challenges, you got it. By the way, they also seed the ground for data network effects. The more data you see, the smarter your AI magic in the middle becomes. And that's the kind of virtuous circle dynamic we want to play to.
That's amazing. And yes, I am a strong believer in that as well, because eventually every other part is getting commoditized. And the only thing that's truly yours is what you described, is because you get to choose how and what you do and what quantity and in what capacity. And that becomes your special sauce, hopefully, over time. I have
Right.
one final question before we go to the rapid fire round.
Okay.
And this is more about Superset. So obviously, from start to today, what's the biggest challenge you've had to overcome to build Superset?
It's the scaling challenge. And I think we're in a continuous process of conquering it. I wouldn't say I don't want us to be too cocky and say that we've already slayed the dragon. We're still figuring out how to, we have these methods and these habits that we use to form these companies. Talked about, the solution memo as an example of one of those habits. But I think, and this is the broader challenge for venture studios, is how do you take that concentrated hands-on approach, and instead of doing 2 to 3 high quality formations per year, which is as much as we can do, what would it take to take that to 7, right? That is work still to be done. And it's a question of social architecture. It's about team, dividing and conquering with a team. It's about finding the right roles and the right talents and plugging them in the right place and in the right way. It's a systems engineering challenge for sure. That's the big thing that I think we made a lot of progress on, but we still have much work to do.
Amazing. With that, we're at the rapid fire round. I'll ask a series of questions and would love to hear your answers 15 seconds or less. You ready?
All right, I'll strap in.
All right. Question number one. What's your favorite book?
I'm a big reader, and I'm still reading all the time. But instinctively, I want to say The Three Musketeers. I read it when I was 11, and I love that book. It's a book about friendship and adventures. I love it still.
Right. Amazing. Next question. Which historical figure do you admire the most and why?
That one's easy. Abraham Lincoln is if you think about the acumen and the wisdom and the compassion and the resolve, the strategy. I don't want to sound outlandish, but just speaking of compassion, he's potentially like a living human saint, right? But all in one, just an incredibly impressive man.
What has been an important but overlooked AI trend in the last 12 months?
I would say data permissioning is the big overlooked challenge, right? And we're seeing this in different places. AI teams want to do a thing. The legal teams come in and say, you can't do that because we cannot warrant that data, especially for consumer facing businesses, that you can do all the things that you want to go and do with that data.
I love that. I agree. I think it's definitely overlooked because almost nobody mentions it and it's very important. All right, next question. What's the one thing about venture studios that most people don't get?
I think when people hear the word venture studio, they think venture capital. So they imagine this kind of portfolio approach. As we've been discussing, it's a much more concentrated hands-on thing without all the diversification that venture capital portfolios enjoy. So that's the most misunderstood thing.
What separates great AI products from the merely good ones?
I think it's a combination of having really latched on to a dull, repetitive problem, right? And the duller, the better. Boring. Boring is beautiful here. And with high stakes. And the final note is it well circumscribed? Does it leak and touch lots and lots of other boundaries? Or can you draw a circle around that problem that it solves? Hopefully it's dull, repetitive, high stakes, then you're off to the races.
I love the circle comment. So it captures so much so nicely because many times the leakage is a huge problem because you just don't. It shows that clarity doesn't, because if you're clear, the circle is pretty clear. So no, that's wonderful. All right, next question. What have you changed your mind on recently?
Well, in fact, I posted on this recently. I was totally wrong about prompt engineering. I thought it was a short term, adorable little thingamajig. I called it LinkedIn cosplay. Prompt engineers, what's that? I was totally wrong. Prompt engineering is here to stay. There's a lot of juice in that squeeze, a lot of artistry and craftsmanship in clever chain of thought prompts with good examples, and so yeah, prompt engineering.
What's your wildest AI prediction for the next 12 months?
Oh my goodness, I think that the majors are going to come out and uh, do some big, big, big acquisitions. I think that the larger platforms are going to start doing some 30, 40, $50 billion acquisitions, and we won't even see it coming. I don't know exactly what sector, but they're coming.
Final question. What's your number one advice to founders who are starting out today?
I would say it is to maintain your demonic intensity always, like to believe in the dream and to never relent. But then you got to find a way to balance that with this humility that allows you to say always, you don't know much, right? And to just like a child, to be learning, learning, learning every single day, to hold opinions strongly but loosely and be ready to revise at a moment's notice.
That's amazing. Tom, given a chance, I would go on for like 2 more hours of this line of questioning because I love hearing your not only answers, but I think they're just amazingly well thought. And you can tell like you have all these threads running in your head that you have the answer ready to go. So thank you so much for coming onto the show and sharing your insights.
Thank you, Pratik. I really appreciated this conversation. We'll carry it on for a couple more hours once the podcast is done.